Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Come on in. We're going to talk some news and politics. We're going to hear some things from me, hopefully, that you don't hear everywhere and maybe anywhere else but here. And the first thing has to do with George H.W. Bush. You know, he passed away. My God, I think they finally got him in the ground. It reminds me of when Reagan died. I thought they were going to parade him around the country and the world in the back of a train for the rest of eternity, but they finally did bury him, I think. Here's the point that I make with George H.W. Bush. If you tell me about, okay, let's say FDR, or you tell me about Abraham Lincoln, I'm listening. Because you know what? I wasn't around. I wasn't alive, and who was widely disparaged for not having completed it by pushing the troops on into Baghdad and creating who knows what kind of a problem we would have had if that had occurred. So that's George Sr.'s legacy as far as being a president of the United States is concerned. I'm not overly impressed. The Republicans weren't even overly impressed. They couldn't get him reelected. I mean, he was a one-term president that was not that popular, that didn't get much done domestically, and who was a foreign relations disaster. Now, was he a World War II hero? Probably. Was he a fine man? Probably. I'm not disputing that. And did he die too young? Did he die tragically? Did he die? No, none of that stuff. The guy's 95 years old. Let's put the cards on the table. Let's be accurate, truthful, and fair in this. This is news that we're talking about. And nobody, I think, really covered the man fairly and evenly as far as his presidency is concerned. These things are important. These things get remembered. They get carried forward. And they did with Reagan and now with George Bush. Everybody's going to be going around telling you, what a great leader this guy was. Like Reagan was a great communicator. God, the guy could barely read a script. He was a B actor that had Alzheimer's in office. He wasn't a great communicator at all. But it goes down in the history books that way because when he died, that's all anybody's ever talked about now for 20 years is that Ronald Reagan was a great communicator when he was in office. He wasn't. And listen to me here. George H.W. Bush was not a great president. Period. All right. So that covers that. I hope I made my point clear on that. The other thing that's of news and important today is that sentencing filing in federal court Friday, that sentencing memo as they call it. Michael Cohen, the current president's former fixer, is what he was called, got 42 months recommended for pleading guilty in the charges against him in federal court. And, of course, Trump's campaign chairman's already been convicted, Paul Manafort. And the beat just goes on here with Trump, and it's obviously getting much closer to the current president. How he can still have supporters in this country, and I'm not just talking about a few. I'm talking about millions, and they're very passionate. And this guy could get elected again in 2020 because of these folks. I just had a conversation this past weekend, and here's what I'm hearing from my Republican friends. They're saying, yeah, well, Trump's a scumbag, and yeah, we don't like him. He doesn't, I don't like him personally. I don't agree with the things that he's done and said on a personal basis. But, professionally, he's really done a great job. And here's the big underlying thing about why they will and why they still and why they will support Donald Trump if he runs again. My God, can you imagine if we had gotten Hillary as president? Yeah, Trump's bad, but what about Hillary? Really? Are you kidding me? What about Hillary? How can you equate the two? Hillary Clinton is getting the dirty end of history here, at least short term. I'll give you one really good example. And this isn't politically popular. This isn't socially acceptable. You're not going to hear this probably anywhere. But I am sick to death of people condemning Hillary Clinton over Benghazi. Now, there have been investigations. They've tried to hang her with that every which way but loose, and they haven't been able to do it. Benghazi was not Hillary Clinton's fault. Now, that's my belief. But here's a fact. George Bush Jr. invaded Iraq during his presidency. as many, I think Dick Cheney even agreed that as many as 250 to 300,000 innocent civilians died because of that. Think about that. We're talking about innocent civilians, men and lots of women and lots of children and lots of babies. And why did they invade Iraq? Because Saddam Hussein, according to George Jr., had weapons of mass destruction. But now we're told that was a mistake. They were wrong. They don't exactly apologize for it, but they're just admitting that they weren't there. Although some people still believe they were, they just couldn't find them. What, folks, they weren't there. I mean, those weapons of mass destruction did not exist. We invaded that country anyway. And a couple of 100,000 innocent civilians died. Now, okay, let's say you're a hard ass and you don't care about the civilians in the Middle East. How about the estimated, I think the last estimate I heard was around 6,000 American boys and girls who got killed. All of those that came home with missing brains and missing limbs and all. So this is the ledger. 5,000 to 6,000 American dead boys and girls, probably 10 times of many of that damaged goods and harmed for life because they did what their president told them to do, because they were defending the country and the world against weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. And Hillary Clinton, on the other side of the ledger, was in charge of the State Department when 4 people died in Benghazi. Now, God love them. They were Americans defending us and helping us, and I don't want to underestimate the significance of their sacrifice, and I wish they had never died. I'm just doing math here. I'm just doing 4 versus a couple of 100,000 dead men, women, and children, civilians in the Middle East, 6,000 dead American boys and girl soldiers, and 10 times that many wounded that are still walking our streets or our hospital wards today. So, yeah, I don't think we would have been that bad off with Hillary Clinton. And it sure wouldn't have been because of Benghazi, because the math just doesn't add up. And I'm sitting here looking at this, and my Republican friends are saying, my God, at least we didn't get Hillary. Okay, what if she'd have been elected, what would her campaign director have gotten convicted on federal charges? Would her fixer have admitted violating federal campaign laws by paying off porn star concubines? I mean, that's just the beginning of it, really. What else do you think Hillary might have done? How would the country have suffered so mightily under her presidency that you can even begin to compare it to the dick-up that we have named Donald Trump, who hasn't accomplished anything, really? He's imposed some tariffs that are harming farmers and manufacturers across the country. He's failed at his number one promise, which is building a wall to solve the immigration crisis, which is ridiculous and stupid. Ridiculous and stupid. Say, that kind of sums it up, doesn't it? All right, I'm going to read to you here just a little piece here of something else I thought was significant. And it begs the question of how does Donald Trump remain popular with such a huge part of America, and why could anybody even conjecture that the man, if he doesn't end up in jail, remember this is a guy running around saying lock her up. Jeez, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. If he's not in jail, there's a pretty good likelihood that he could be reelected. Okay, so here you go. Here's a day brightener, as I like to call it. I mean, it's a little bit of a downer, to say the least. It might be I don't know. It's like a horror story here, but this is something that appeared in The Hill. So, the online website, The Hill. It's by an op-ed contributor to The Hill. This guy's name's Ford O'Connell. He's an opinion contributor. And the Hill wants to make sure that the views expressed by contributors are their own and not necessarily the view of the Hill. But here's what this guy has to say. More than 24 Democrats reportedly are eyeing the possibility of challenging President Donald Trump in 2020. Media darling Beto O'Rourke has met with former President Barack Obama. Former Vice President Joe Biden claims that he is the most qualified person in the country to be president. Probably true. Senator Kamala Harris says she'll make her presidential decision over the holiday. And the Boston Globe editorial board praised former Massachusetts Democratic Governor Deval Patrick for calling it quits on 2020 and suggested that the Bay State senior senator Elizabeth Warren would be wise to heed his example. Hillary Clinton would like to run for a third time, but slumping ticket prices on her current speaking tour are an ominous sign. And then there is Senator Bernie Sanders, who lost the Democratic nomination to Clinton in 2016, but who is nevertheless mulling a bid as well. Simply put, 2020 is about to get pretty wild on the Democrats' side of the ledger, and no one should be shocked if it descends into a no-holds-barred mosh pit of progressive egos slamming each other and Trump at every turn. Let us also not forget about the mainstream media, who will be salivating and panting for the next year and a half over who will represent their beloved blue team in the big head-to-head contest. Still, it's important to keep a few things in mind, says Mr. O'Connell. Assuming Donald Trump runs for re-election, he is the favorite to win, despite recent polls. Even the bookmakers are currently in agreement. The reason is simple. Incumbency has its privileges. Since 1900, 20 presidents have run for re-election. The incumbents have won 15 times and lost 5. If you include former President Gerald Ford, who was never elected at the ballot box in the first place, as you'll recall. And now if you remove Ford from the equation, the winning percentage among presidential incumbents would likely be good enough to capture baseball's Cy Young Award in recent years. Further, despite the chirping of the pundits about what 2018 means for 2020, recent history has shown that there is in fact very little correlation between a president's first midterm election and their re-election bid. Case in point, Bill Clinton's party lost 52 House seats in 1994, and Barack Obama's party lost 63 House seats in 2010, yet both men garnered more than 330 electoral votes in 1996 and 2012, respectively. Now, you add in the fact that the 2020 Electoral College playing field will likely be very similar to the 2016 edition. 40 states are essentially already decided, and 10 are up for grabs. And one starts to see why Trump has a very real possibility of securing 4 more years in the White House. To prevail, the Democratic nominee would have to either sweep the Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota, or dislodge Florida or Arizona from Trump. That's not an easy task. As an incumbent, President Trump's biggest worry is not a particular candidate or a ticket or even the Russia investigation at this stage, but whether the country endures an economic recession in 2020. So when Trump told the Fox Business Network's Trish Riggin in October that his biggest threat was the Federal Reserve, he was pretty close to the mark. None of this is to suggest that Trump is a shoo-in for re-election or that he doesn't have some glaring vulnerabilities. He certainly does, as the Cook Report's Charlie Cook recently outlined. But if Trump can find a way to broaden his voter appeal, eat into the Democratic advantage on health care, and shine a big spotlight on the Democratic Party's cantankerous ways in Congress, Trump will be a 2-term president. Well, think about that for a little while. This Ford O'Connell served as director of rural outreach for John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign, so you know where he's at on this thing. But I think he's got it right about the economy, and that is always the Achilles heel for every Republican, of course, because they lead the country straight into recession. That's a proven historical fact with Republican administrations. And by the way, have you looked at your 401k lately? It looks like it's happening again. The stock market is in correction and headed south the last time I looked. Now, I don't want that to happen, obviously. I've got investments like a lot of people do. I'm trying to get through the retired life here. But that's one of the best bets to make sure that we don't have another 4 years of Donald Dump Trump. Well, anyway, that's it. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's a little bit of a rant for you. Some news and politics on the ticket here. We're going to get back to some music and some hockey and, I don't know, some other things here that you're going to like. I got a little story coming up for you after the holiday. And appreciate everybody listening in, of course, and encourage everyone to like it on Facebook, follow it on Twitter, check it out on YouTube, see us on iTunes, download us, listen to us on Spotify when you're out driving around. I mean, that's a great way to check out the podcast. We need your support. We need to grow this thing if we're going to keep it going. And I want you to be in on this. I want your participation. Comment on Facebook or on www.podcastbygeorge.com. Leave your comments there and your story ideas and whatever. And there's a very good likelihood you'll end up on the show. But for now, that's another podcast by George.